hoop wel een zeker standpunt in te nemen, want niet echt altijd goed lukt, want vooral Nigel Farage zal het uitleggen, maar ik ga hem zelf het woord. Nigel Farage, jij hebt het woord.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me loud and clear? Yes. Very good. I haven't got a clue what you said in that introduction, but I'm assuming it was nice. I don't know. Now, you're all a very long way away, which gives me the assumption that you perhaps think I bite, or perhaps I'm really rather dangerous in some way, but I can assure you that really isn't the case, unless, of course, you are an unelected European Commissioner or official, in which case, yes, you are very much my enemy. Now, it's come to my attention that the University of Ghent has recently awarded honorary doctorates to two of my least favourite people in the world, Mr. Barroso and, of course, my great mate, Herman van Rompuy. So I know that this evening I'm not going to be awarded an honorary doctorate or anything of the kind, but I want to say thank you very much for inviting me along this evening, for having the opportunity to come and address you. I am aware that my comments are seen in some quarters to be controversial, subversive, dangerous, but I'd like you to approach what I have to say with an open mind, and I'll give my presentation, we'll have some questions, and you will leave, I hope tonight, understanding that there is another point of view. And in a sense, that's how I got involved in politics in the first place. I had never had any aspirations to get involved in politics at all. I went to work in the City of London in the early 1980s when we had the great fortune, in my opinion, to have a Prime Minister, our first female Prime Minister, in Margaret Thatcher. Somebody who believed in free markets, who believed in wealth creation, who believed in low taxes, who believed in incentives, and I rushed into this City of London, this global financial marketplace, and I was the original yuppie, you know, with a great big mobile phone that was about this big, and I used to, by the age of 22 or 23, I was earning fantastic sums of money, though I was spending even more in the nightclubs every evening, and that was my life. I was going to spend my life as a proper capitalist, and the ambition and the aim was to make as much money as I possibly could, and to have a good time. And what got me into politics was one day in 1990, and it had been a fairly quiet day on the exchanges, and I was in my usual bar in the city, tanking into the gin and tonics or whatever it was, when somebody came in, a runner came in and said, breaking news, Britain has decided to join the exchange rate mechanism. Now what that meant is that Britain had decided to go into stage 2 of a 3-stage process of economic and monetary union, which you now know as the euro. And I was opposed to Britain going into the euro. I was opposed to us joining the ERM and pegging sterling against the Deutschmark, and I won't tell you what my initial utterances were that evening, but suffice to say they were fairly liberally dosed with Anglo-Saxon, and I just thought, you know, they've all gone bloody mad. I mean, how can sterling be pegged against the Deutschmark? We're a different country. We have a different economy. We have different interest rates. We're at different stages of the business cycle. We have different patterns of trade across the world. Germany has stronger patterns of trade within Europe. And I was absolutely convinced from day one that this was going to be a disaster. Well, it didn't take very long, because within 2 years we had interest rates in Britain that were exactly double what they should have been. We had a year in '92 of record house repossessions, of record business bankruptcies, and we had 1 million people, 1 million extra people in Britain were put onto the unemployment register as part of this crazy idea that somehow Britain was a European country. Now, I thought then, if the Conservatives support it, if Labour support it, if the Lib Dems support it, if the entire political class supports it, I don't support it, and I'm going to do something about it. And I, next time round, will not be made to vote for these people. I will put myself up for elections. And that, for me, is how the whole thing started. I got involved in this on the economics of it. I got involved in this believing that Britain was not suited for economic and monetary union. And I'll come later on in the talk to that principle perhaps applied more deeply to Northern European and Southern European countries. So that was it. I was hooked on the politics. But please, if there are those of you who come along tonight expecting to hear an anti-European rant, then I'm very sorry, but I'm going to have to disappoint you. Because I am not anti-European in any way at all. I'm married to a German, I've worked for 2 French companies, and I've drunk more Spanish Rioja than most people alive in Britain today. I love Europe. But what is wonderful about this continent of Europe, what makes it a more fascinating, more interesting place than America or Australia, is that we can go within a relatively short distance, let's say 100 miles. Oh no, sorry, you've got kilometres here, haven't you? And we can go in a relatively short distance and we can find different peoples, speaking different languages, eating different foods, doing things differently. What we should be saying is vive la différence. It's wonderful that we have this diversity in Europe, but what is objectionable is this thing that masquerades as Europe, namely the European Union, which is trying to bring together 27 different peoples, speaking 21 different languages, with completely different economies, histories and cultures. They're trying to push them all into one new European state, and they're doing it, in my view, without the consent of the people. Now, let's return to the economics. We have a European Union. We now have a Eurozone. How well I remember when the Euro was launched, the big fireworks display that happened in Brussels, the usual champagne receptions, and this was going to be the new dawn. That somehow, if everybody had the same currency and the same interest rates and the same central bank, it was going to lead to huge prosperity. Well, here we are in the midst of a massive euro crisis. It was obvious from day one that just as I realised back in 1990 that Britain could not be pegged against the Deutschmark, it was obvious from 1999 onwards that Greece never fitted the criteria. That in fact they fiddled the figures, they fiddled what was then known as the Maastricht criteria, so desperate were they to get Greece involved in the euro. And what we've now seen with Greece is we've seen a bailout. What we're witnessing on the Greek streets are massive, huge, violent demonstrations and protests. We're witnessing the beginnings of terrorism, pinprick terrorism against EU targets within Greece, and a very angry populace. The same, of course, has happened in Ireland. Ireland, which for 500 years had fought against the British. My press officer here is an Irish nationalist, and we disagree on little bits of history from time to time, but never mind. But where Herman and I do agree is that Ireland had enjoyed her own independence, had enjoyed her own self-government for a relatively short period of time. She joined the euro at a time when her economy was booming, at a time when her economy was overheating. And so the Irish situation is different to the Greek situation, but it's similar in this one respect, that again, Ireland wasn't fitted, wasn't suited to being part of the economic and monetary union, to having the euro. And what Ireland had, for the first 7 years of the euro, she had interest rates that were 3 to 4% lower than they should have been. So the speculative housing boom that was taking place, particularly in Dublin and the surrounds, was magnified by what was effectively free money. She's now being bailed out. It is only a matter of time before Portugal is bailed out. Now, what's the future for these countries? I am in no doubt that the best thing that could happen to Greece, to Ireland, to Portugal, and perhaps ultimately to Spain, the best thing that could happen is if they bust out of economic and monetary union, if they default on some element of their debts, and if they go back to having their own national currencies with a significant short-term devaluation. I am in no doubt that that's their future. But our lords and masters, the prime ministers of all of our nations, Who's going from Belgium, of course, I'm not actually sure. But they're all going to, and I'll come back to Belgium, don't you worry. But the prime ministers of all our nations are getting together on Thursday and Friday of this week in Brussels because they now want to change the treaty. They want to amend Article 136 because they know that actually bailing out Eurozone countries was illegal under the treaty and wasn't allowed, and the rules have been broken. And 4 brave German professors are taking Angela Merkel to the German Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe to declare these bailouts illegal, and Merkel knows they're going to win in the German court, which is why they've got to change the treaty. So whichever way you look at it, economic and monetary union is not a success, and if they're able, by Friday evening, to have agreed a permanent bailout fund, to have agreed to effectively keep imprisoned countries that were never fitted into joining EMU in the first place, then I'm afraid, far from this being good news on Friday night, it will actually be disastrous news. Absolutely disastrous news for Ireland, Greece, Portugal, and perhaps even Spain. Because those countries will remain trapped inside something that they should not be a part of. Now, I could go on about the economics because actually what we're doing is we're building what we call a social market model in Europe. And that means we keep passing legislation that says we have to have extended maternity rights. We have to have extended paternity rights. We must all be paid a decent minimum working wage. We must all have a sensible allowance of holidays. It all sounds great, doesn't it? It all sounds wonderful and civilised and sensible, until you start to add on top of that the health and safety regulations. You know, to change a light bulb now in Britain, you first, if this is happening in a factory, to change a light bulb in Britain under EU law, you now first have to conduct a risk assessment. You then have to examine whether you're qualified to climb up a ladder. I'm not joking. And if you do, there must be at least 2 people to help you do it. Now, I've no doubt that over the years, changing light bulbs in factories, people have been hurt. I've no doubt about it. But do we actually need the state, the European state at every level, to codify all of this? Then, of course, we have on top of that, and even worse, the whole environmental regulations. Now, it may be that CO2 emissions are leading to global warming. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but I do note that actually global temperatures are somewhat cooler today than they were in 1998. And yet we've set up, through the EU, a mechanism that actually guarantees we will de-industrialise Europe. Why do I say that? I'll give you an example. Big steel firm called Chorus, owned by a massive Indian magnate called Mr. Mittal. They had a plant up in Redcar, in the northeast of England. They have just closed down in Redcar. Thank you, it's only water, how dull, but never mind. They've just closed down in Redcar. They've closed down the steel plant in Redcar, and for doing that, the taxpayer is paying them carbon credits of £300 million. So for closing down a factory, for putting a couple of thousand people out of work, for stopping steel manufacture in the northeast of England, this giant multinational called Chorus has earned £300 million. And what have they done? They just reopened that same steel production in India. So the net effect on CO2 emissions is 0. But what we've actually done as taxpayers, as part of this crazy European Union environmental scheme, is we have paid, in this case, the northeast of England, a company in the northeast of England, to de-industrialise us and move us out to the east. Every single time the European Parliament approves a directive that has been given to us by the European Commission, I can hear in the distance Indian and Chinese businesses roaring with approval. You know, we're not going to have if we go on like this, the European marketplace, which currently represents 18% of the GDP of the globe, will, it's projected to be 9% by 2020. Frankly, it could best part disappear. This is not an economic model that works. But if that wasn't serious enough, there's something I think that matters far, far more than that. And that is the complete absence of democracy within this system. Many critics of the European Union have said from day one that it's an undemocratic system. Well, by jingo, they're right, aren't they? Because the government of the European Union is the unelected European Commission. It is the civil servants who have the sole right to propose legislation. It is the civil servants who have the sole right to amend that legislation. All we can do, as the elected bit of it, is to effectively rubber stamp and occasionally amend and delay that legislation. It's incredible. It's quite incredible. After two massive world wars that caused such ruin, destruction and misery across Europe, two world wars that were fought to stop people robbing individuals of democracy, to give nation states the ability to run their own lives. It is incredible that with this European Union model we've turned our backs on it. But that was then. But it's got even worse than that. Because in the early part of this last decade, the EU decided, let's stop pretending, let's now announce that we are actually a state. And let's have a European constitution. Do you remember? And, you know, there were big ceremonies and European Union flags and anthems and the launching of this constitution. They tried to pretend that it was being drafted in a way that the Founding Fathers drafted the Constitution of the United States of America. But they had a slight problem. And the problem was that in one or two countries they had to put it to a referendum. And the French said no. And the Dutch overwhelmingly said no. And we all know, had this gone to a referendum in Britain or in Germany or frankly almost every country, the answer would have been no. But what they did, I think, sums up the EU as we know it today. They absolutely refused to accept the no votes, refused to accept their validity. They rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty. And in fact, an Italian politician, D'Amato, former Prime Minister of Italy, actually openly said the good thing about calling this a treaty and not a constitution is that we don't have to put it to referendums. Just to give you an idea of how democratic these people are. Well, of course, there was a problem, because one country, Ireland, under their constitution, had to put it to a referendum. And the Irish said no. What a wonderful day that was in Strasbourg. We turned up the next day, and we had green T-shirts made with Respect the Irish Vote, and over 100 MEPs wore them. One of my colleagues even wore a little leprechaun hat. And we were all in very, very jolly spirits indeed. And there was a debate on the Irish vote. And I'll never forget what Martin Schulz, who was the leader of the European Socialist Group and the European Socialist Party, said. Schulz said, in the wake of Ireland voting no, we must not bow to populism. By which he meant the democratic will of the people of Ireland. We must not bow to populism. And in response to that, I gave one of my speeches in the European Parliament. And for those of you that have seen YouTube, you will know I am consistently helpful and moderate in all things. And I pointed out that actually what was happening here was that an undemocratic organisation was now becoming an anti-democratic organisation. Such was their total contempt for the views of the people of Ireland, of the Netherlands, of France, or anywhere else. They are the masters. They know what is best. They know what is good for us, and damn all of us if we think we're going to have any democratic say. I remember on that day just how angry they'd become. The Schulz again spoke in that debate, compared my behaviour in the Parliament to that of Adolf Hitler in the Reichstag. I mean, there is no form of abuse that these people won't sink to. Danny Cohn-Bendit, who was the leader of the Paris riots back in 1968, said that I was mentally ill. Well, my family might agree with that, but I mean, you know, this is how dangerous these people are. This is what I'm saying to you. The whole thing is anti-democratic. It's only 20 years ago that there was a regime a little to the east of here, called the Soviet Union, who used to operate in exactly the same way. They didn't have commissioners, they had commissars. They had 5-year plans, and 10-year plans, and 20-year plans. They organised the thing on the basis of central planning and control. They organised the thing on the basis that they knew what was best for people, and that people weren't competent to decide their own future. And I think that any argument that we can reform, amend or change the European Union to democratise it, to open it up, died in 2005 and 6 with their behaviour over those free, fair and democratic referendums. So I now find myself, former yuppie and city boy, in the rather strange position of being the joint leader of the only opposition group that the European Parliament has really ever had in its entire existence. And I may not be popular amongst the political class, but I couldn't care less. I don't want to be popular amongst those people, these career politicians who care more about themselves than they care about nation states and they care about democracy. But what I do know is that right across our continent there is a growing wave, a growing democratic revolution that is taking place, and it's being led predominantly by your generation. Your generation who can see that if we're going to have successful futures, we must be part of a global economy and not close our minds and believe that Europe is the beginning and the end of everything. A young generation who actually want to be able to determine their own futures through the ballot box. That's the point about democracy, isn't it? In democracy, you don't just vote for your government, but you have the ability, once every 4 or 5 years, to say, you're a cheating, lying, dirty lot of rascals, get me gone, and I'll put somebody else in with a different manifesto. That's what the young people across Europe are saying, and I think we have a very interesting specimen of this in Finland, right at this moment in time. In Finland, which has been a 3-party system, a conservative, socialist and liberal party system, and in Finland, the Eurosceptic party, the True Finns, whose MEP, I'm proud to say is part of our group, are up to 18.5% in the polls and are just 1 point behind the government with 6 weeks to go before the general election. So things are changing across Europe, and is it any wonder when you look at the way we're governed? You know, it was objectionable enough to have a European Commission in day one. But what did the Lisbon Treaty give us? It gave us Herman Van Rompuy. The President of Europe. And it seems that I rather upset him. I did make the point that we've been told that once we had a President of Europe, it would be a figure so big and powerful that he would stop the traffic in Beijing and Washington. And I was struck that I didn't really think that Herman Van Rompuy would stop the traffic in Brussels, let alone anywhere else. And so I did say, it's true, that he had the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. Now, I don't think, as far as political insults go, that was really too heavy. I mean, after all, I've told you what they've been calling me in the Parliament, and that's apparently fine. But oh, goodness me, didn't it cause a bit of a storm? And I was asked for the President of the European Parliament. I went in for a meeting with him, and piece of advice to all of you, when you leave university and you go on and you pursue your careers wherever you go, whenever you're invited to a meeting and the person inviting you doesn't offer you coffee, you're in big trouble, all right? So I went in to meet the President of the European Parliament, and it was very much an interview without coffee. And he said to me, I'm asking you to apologise. I said, oh yes? He said, I want you to apologise to the European Parliament. I want you to apologise to Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, and I want you to apologise to the people of Belgium. And I said, in advance, was there anything else I must do, you know? So of course I completely refused, but I did the next day, was after some thought, apologise to bank clerks the world over for any offence that I might have caused. But so upset with me were they, that they fined me the maximum fine that the European Parliament can bring in, and they fined me 10 days' pay, because I wasn't very nice about Mr Van Rompuy. And the President of the Parliament said to me, this will never happen again. And I thought, how on earth are they going to stop me? And last week, I had a little exchange with him last week, and there he was, in December, shaking hands with, of course, Colonel Gaddafi, the man that is now our enemy, although on reflection, I suppose it was one unelected leader greeting another unelected leader, so perhaps nothing terribly unusual about that. So, and I do admit, I've been a bit of a thorn in their side, but apparently what's really upset them are my comments about Belgium. That's what's really upset them. And the British Foreign Office have said, or said to me at the time, that I'd done a terrible thing, that I'd insulted this great unified nation of Belgium. Well, I think that when we look back at our histories, when we look back at our own lives, often there are things for which we should apologise. And as a British person, I think I should apologise to you all tonight for the artificial creation of Belgium. Back in 1839, shouldn't have done it. I don't know what we were thinking of. Of course, effectively, we really had you as a buffer zone, didn't we? Between the French and the Germans. I mean, that was the thinking of the Brits at the time. And, you know, as long ago as 100 years ago, before the First World War, there were senior Belgian politicians saying, this place is not a country, it's not a nation. So quite why me saying it has caused such great offence, I don't know. But I do note that I made these comments on the 24th of February last year, that Parliament was dissolved in Belgium at the end of April, and there hasn't been a government since, and it's over 280 days, so I do feel borne out by this, and I have to say, I have to express a slight prejudice of my own. I do think that the Flemish people deserve to have their own independent free state, and if I can do anything to help them get it, I will. Please bear in mind, if and when you get your independent, self-governing, democratic, free state here, what will be the point of it if you're part of a European form of government that already makes over 75% of the laws of the nation states? What will be the point of it? Particularly here, where your success in business through hard work and entrepreneurial flair would be destroyed by the employment regulations, by the LAGO regulations, by some of the crackpot regulations on the environment. What would be the point of any of it? What would be the point of democracy if we're all swallowed up by this state? So my job, I feel, is to help lead initially and then link arms right across this European continent with like-minded people. We're not from the right, we're not from the left, we're not from the centre. We come from all walks of life. We believe in democracy. We believe in self-government. We believe in having our own proud nations. I want a Europe that trades together. I want a Europe that works together. I want us to agree, sensible, common, minimum standards on things. I want to have reciprocal deals between British universities and German universities. I want to do all of those things that we ought to be doing in the 21st century as next-door neighbours. But we cannot have those freedoms, and we cannot have our democracy, all the while the Van Rompuys and Barrosos are ruling our lives, and the sooner we get rid of them, the better. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm sorry if I if you feel I wasn't direct enough in that talk. And if anybody doesn't understand what I'm saying, there we are. But, you know, I believe in this very, very strongly indeed. You see, I have this feeling that if you take away democracy from people, rather like our friends in Greece at the moment, if the way you vote in the next Greek general election doesn't matter because you can't set interest rates, you can't set tax rates, because the European Central Bank and the unelected bureaucrats and officials in Brussels now run your country, if democracy is taken from you, all you are left with is civil disorder and civil disobedience. And my great fear is that unless we get proper democratic solutions to our future in Europe, that what we will see is a Europe of a whole mass of little mini nasty civil wars. And that's why I feel it is so important, as somebody that's got 4 children, that we fight to get freedom and democracy back. Right, now it's your turn now. You can be as abusive as you like, you can throw things at me, you can agree with me, you can ask questions, you can do as you wish. So let's open it up. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I heard you talking about that we should focus on a global economy instead of just a European economy. But things as they're being now, like China's coming up, India's coming up, and they work for 50 cents an hour. We have social standards, laws for environment, so on, so on. Isn't it more agreeable to form a European trade bloc as to oppose these new coming economies that work for nothing?
It's interesting that you ask that, because most people think that the European Union is a free trade area. That's what most people think. And indeed, my parents, when the Brits had a referendum on this back in 1975, my parents both voted yes, because they were told they were voting for a free trade area. They never were. The European Union is a customs union, not a free trade area. Now this is a point that the general public don't get. Interestingly, it's a point that many businesses are only just beginning to hoist on board. But the difference, of course, is fundamental, isn't it? That, you know, you and I can form between us a free trade area. And we can agree to operate with each other on a certain set of rules. And that's fine, because we both freely enter into that. No problem. And I can say to you tomorrow, I've had enough of this. You know, I don't want it. Let's end it. Let's call the whole thing off. Fine. Easy, straightforward, simple. And across the world, there are lots of little free trade agreements and quite a lot of big free, you know, NAFTA, for example, quite big free trade agreements. The difficulty with this as a customs union is that you and I, sir, are not just bound by what we do with a customs union, we are also bound outside of that. Now, I appreciate different countries have different sizes and may have different interests, but look at it from my point of view. You know, I come from the UK. I come from the most globalised country in the European time zone. That because of language, because of our financial markets, and because of our incredible relationship through the Commonwealth with lots of other parts of the world. You know, we've got Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India begging us through the Commonwealth to enhance trade relationships between us. And we have to say, no, sorry, we can't do that. We're forbidden from doing it by our membership of the European Union. So you're right, we face big global challenges, big competitive global challenges. And, you know, I made the point in my talk that if we go on protecting ourselves with layer after layer after layer of legislation, we actually make ourselves less competitive and we hand business over to other countries. But I do think that if we look at the way global trade is configured, we look at the way it's argued for through the World Trade Organization, the European Union is the only customs union of any size in the world. It is completely and hopelessly outdated by at least 50 years. It is not the future. It is not the way forward. I want a Europe where we're free, as I say, to agree things between each other, but we're also free, if we choose, to negotiate our own trade deals across the world. The future, in this 21st century globalised economy, the future will be best for those who are flexible and adaptable and can move with the times. Does that answer your question?
Well, sort of. It says your point of view, for sure. So
Oh, it's my point of view, all right. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Okay, there was another one somewhere. Yeah.
I heard your interesting view on democracy, and I agree that, of course, European Commission, the fact that it's not democratically elected, it's true, of course. But on the other hand, I also trust the European Parliament that can approve this new European Commission each 5 years and has to check on the European Commission. As the European Parliament is democratically elected, for me it's also a representation of the view of the population. Plus, of course, the European Commission can do a proposal. They cannot make a law, they can do a proposal. And it's the European Parliament that is elected, that has to approve it. Plus, together with the ministers, which we also elected, they together have to approve and get the green sign. So, if you don't agree what happens in the European Union, the decision that has been made, maybe you just don't find enough support, but then again, that's also the consequence of democracy, I think.
Well, I mean, let's just remind ourselves of one thing. That, and I'm going to repeat this because it's true, and I think it has a bearing on your comments. Let's just remember that the European Commission, the bureaucracy, has the sole right of initiative. Only they can propose legislation. Only they have the ability and the power to propose the amendment of legislation. And then, yes, you're right, it does come through the European Parliament, but the European Parliament itself does not have that power and does not have that ability. Now, your other argument that somehow these commissioners have democratic legitimacy because the European Parliament has voted for them, sorry, I don't really agree with that. And we've had a long-running exchange, my friend Mr. Barroso and I, who I do like in a way, because he's got a good sense of humour. He needs it when I'm around. And I keep saying, but Mr. Barroso, you have no democratic legitimacy. And he keeps saying, but of course I do. I was voted for by this Parliament. Yes, he was, but we were only given the choice of one candidate. I don't call that democracy. I call that the political class rubber stamping its own. So I don't buy the argument. I don't buy the argument. Look. The challenge to democratising the EU came up 10 years ago, when the great Giscard d'Estaing was setting up the European Constitution. Had the people who were behind this project been Democrats, that was the opportunity. They could have democratised the European Union. They could have made the government of Europe come from the Parliament itself. They could have made that democratically accountable once every 5 years at European elections. They could have transferred the role of the Commission into being the civil service that actually carried it out. They could have turned it into a proper democratic form of government. And I challenged them again and again and again on this. And I said, if you do that, and if you put it to referendums of the peoples of Europe, you may well win. You may well inspire people into thinking that something of value here is being created. I said, I won't want it myself, because I believe in something called the national interest. I won't want it myself, because I don't want a European flag. I don't want a European anthem. I want my own. Thank you very much indeed. But had they done that, they may well have won. They didn't do it. Because right from day one, this project was set up by a man called John Monnet. These people are not, I repeat, undemocratic. They are anti-democratic. They hate democracy. They see it as being inconvenient. Because once every 4 or 5 years, a government that's taking this course is replaced by a government that takes that course. They didn't do it. They will never do it. And that is why we have to bring this whole thing down. It is damn dangerous. It is now turning into something that is subjugating the peoples of Europe to a new system of government which increasingly resembles the one that mercifully fell to pieces in the Soviet Union 20 years ago. Come back.
I find the idea of a European Commission that is made from the people that are elected in the Parliament very interesting. Then my question would be, who would you choose, or how would you decide it? Because of course you cannot say there's a majority or a minority in the European Parliament, because we all have different political groups and backgrounds in different countries, bigger countries, smaller countries. So you couldn't even base it on the votes or the number of votes. So how would you organize this? How would you choose them from the parliament that is elected?
Well, that's not for me to do, is it? I am not going to be constructing the European state. I don't think there is any democratic will for a European state. The point I'm making to you is that those that run this, if they were democrats to their fingertips, would have thought all of this through and found a system. And I tell you why democracy works. I remember very well in the 1970s when Britain was such a state-controlled country, and income tax rates for top earners of 83%, all of our bright and best young people leaving Britain, emigrating all over the world. My own father, who was appalled by all of this, but he didn't join an underground resistance movement. He just determined that he would back the Conservative Party to win the election of 1979 and to overturn things. And that's the great thing about democracy. Even if you're unhappy with the majority government of the day, you vow that in future you will get rid of it and change it. I'm reminded of my friend Herman here, whose antecedents fought for 500 years against the British with guns and bullets and bombs to break away from the United Kingdom to set up their own independent Irish Free State, and now they see themselves as no more than a province of this set of European institutions. I put it to you that we will see Irish nationalism and violence again because their identity and their democracy has been taken from them, and that's just how serious I think this whole thing is. Yeah.
I just want to ask one question. Your analysis is very correct, it's even worse. What I ask to you and all the nationalist persons who are in that parliament, what the fuck are you doing there?
Well, that's a very interesting comment. Actually, history is full of this. Am I a nationalist? Not sure. I'm a nationalist. I believe in nations.
So what you're doing in the Soviet Union, that's the Soviet Union we're speaking of. The European Union is the Soviet Union, and the big chief is Germany. A central committee.
Before I went to the European Parliament, which is way back in 1999, goodness me, I'm a veteran now. Before I went to the European Parliament, we had been sending people by direct election from Britain for 20 years. For 20 years, we'd sent MEPs to the European Parliament. All of them had about the same profile in Britain as Herman Van Rompuy has got across Europe. No one knew what their names were. No one knew what the European Parliament did. No one knew what the European Parliament cost. And I went in there in 1999 with a very simple agenda. That was to discover the truth about what was going on in the European Parliament and the European institutions, and to report that back to the British people as accurately and as fairly as I could. And do you know something? Since 1999, the percentage of Britons that now want us to have a political divorce from this union and its replacement with a proper trade agreement and friendship agreement with our European neighbours has soared. I think that the UKIP policy of taking those seats and reporting back has helped British public opinion enormously. And I'm also proud to say that I have been able to link arms with people fighting in the referendums in Ireland and France and elsewhere. So I think it's been a constructive and a correct thing to do. But don't worry, I'm not going to go native. I'm not going to get bought for the system. And given the opportunity, I promise you, sir, that I would be the only turkey that would vote for Christmas. All right? Absolutely promise you that. It's funny because I often get that question in the UK media. They say, well, how can you go to a parliament that you don't think we should be a part of? And I point out that Alex Salmond, the leader of the Scottish Nationalist Party, was a member of the Westminster Parliament for over 20 years. Alex Salmond quite happily went to Westminster as someone that didn't want to be there. There are, in fact, through history, quite a lot of precedents for it.
Yes, but through history of persons in Ireland, they didn't go to the Parliament in Westminster.
Well, Sinn Féin, you're right, Sinn Féin did adopt the not take the seats policy. However, before that, there was a man in the 19th century called Charles Parnell who did go to the Westminster Parliament, and he decided to use the rules of procedure in the Parliament in such a way to try and make Gladstone's life completely miserable and totally hell. And in fact, poor old Gladstone, I mean, he tore what was left of his hair out. And in fact, they nearly got the Irish Home Rule Bill as early as 1885. Parnell's tactics very nearly worked. You know, what in the end got Ireland its independence? Yes, it was partly the big Sinn Féin vote of 1918, but actually it was the after effects of a massive world war. So attending parliaments and causing trouble can do a lot of good. And when they changed the rules, and when they changed the constitution of the Lisbon Treaty, I got a meeting together of like-minded MEPs. And I said, look, as far as I'm concerned, it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. You know, we have played for the rules in all the years that I've been here. They've now broken the rules. We're now going to give them hell. And that was when we started with, you know, we had our big demonstrations and our referendum posters, and they started fining us all and the usual sort of thing. Unlike the Westminster Parliament, when we really frustrated their procedures and put in speaking requests to keep the Parliament open all night, all they did, of course, was just change the rules. Because there are no rules in this European construct. This is, you know, what we're up against here. We are not the nationalists. Those of us that want our nation states are not the nationalists. What we are up against is a new phenomenon. It is called Euro-nationalism. You know, when they play that wretched anthem in the Parliament with the great big flag, you know, they stand ramrod straight to attention. They were busy. I mean, believe this or not, the Liberals and the Greens last week in that debate about Gaddafi want the EU to go to war. Anything to give the EU legitimacy. Anything to give the EU power. They are the nationalists. And they're not small-end nationalists, they're big-end nationalists. They are damn dangerous people, and we've got to stop them. So.
So you have mentioned the United States, but isn't the major difference between the United States and the EU or EU-USSR that the United States have got a constitution that, even though they don't do that much with it, the constitution is limiting the competence of the federal government of the United States. Remember Mr. Dr. Now Paul always says we are not competent, whereas the Lisbon Treaty, it's a treaty, it's not a constitution, because it is not protecting the people against the government, because that's the major goal of constitution. And when I was visiting Ireland before the election there, I understood why they would say no, because they understood very well the EU is gonna put our way of living out of law, and they didn't like that. And hence, I prefer having a EU-SSR constitution in order to be protected against government, because the present Lisbon Treaty, if I got it right, is self-amending.
Yes.
This means the EU-SSR is competent for everything. Even if they've forgotten it, they just add it and they are competent. And I'm afraid of that. I don't like it.
I would agree with your analysis that in the USA, the states in the USA have a far greater deal of autonomy and self-government than the states do within the European Union. That is certainly true. And they have a very well-written and very well-drafted constitution, which, as you say, protects the rights of the individual. I have seen nothing, either in the European Constitution or now the Lisbon Treaty, that does that. I thought one of the biggest jokes of all was the Charter of Fundamental Rights. You know, they're going to give us the EU, we're going to give us the right to marry and the right to work. I mean, I don't need some bunch of bureaucrats to dream this stuff up for me. We've had it since Magna Carta and before anyway. But what was interesting about that was Article 54 of the EU's Charter of Fundamental Rights said, in an emergency, we can take all of this away. So there was never any intention with the Constitution, nor with the Lisbon Treaty, that we should have any of this. I think the Lisbon Treaty is effectively, you put your finger on it, sir, by saying it's self-amending. It is effectively an enabling act. It gives the EU the power in what it can determine to be a state of emergency, to frankly do whatever it likes. And I rest with my theme for this evening, which is that the EU is no longer undemocratic, it is now profoundly anti-democratic, nationalistic, and very, very dangerous. And I, again, we all come from different cultures and histories and backgrounds, but I mean, I've been brought up in the United Kingdom to believe that whilst we're far from perfect, one of the things that we've enjoyed progressively since 1215, since the 25 lords threatened to kill King John unless he put in place some proper protections for individuals against the state. I mean, that was the truth of it. They actually would have cut off King John's head had he not done it, and he did it. And we've grown up believing that the presumption of innocence before guilt was vital. We've grown up believing that habeas corpus was absolutely vital, that the state could not imprison you without charge or without presenting the body before at least a magistrate. And we've grown up believing that our right, if we're accused of something by the state or the prosecution service, our right to be judged by 12 good men and true of our fellow peers through a jury system was a good thing. And I now see all of those basic protections that we have had in the United Kingdom for the individual against the state being steadily eroded and destroyed. And I think it's a very sad thing. And perhaps it is this belief in genuine liberty and genuine freedom. Perhaps that's why it's the younger generation, as I mentioned earlier, in Britain and in France and right across Europe. It's this younger generation who perhaps have a rather more, who perhaps nobly have rather more idealistic and optimistic aspirations for the future. It's them that are turning against this European state because they can see it for what it is. So,
you, as a member of the European Parliament, do you think Turkey will join the Union? Are we able to prevent it, or do you think it will happen anyway?
I've got a bet. I've got a €20 bet with the Turkish ambassador to the European Union that Britain will leave before Turkey joins. So we'll have to see. I mean, you know, in answer to this gentleman here earlier, I touched on Euro-nationalism. You know, why is Europe wanting to admit a country, 98% of which is in Asia? You know, and we've even heard Barroso in some of his wilder rantings talking possibly about Israel and bits of North Africa joining the Union. They want to build a global power. That's what it's about. I'll tell you a little story about that. It's perhaps a bit of a story against myself, because I should behave better sometimes, but there we are. And it wasn't long after I'd been elected, back in '99, and I was hopping in a taxi to go out to the Brussels airport, and they put with me in the car a German MEP called Elmar Brok. And Elmar Brok, great big fat chap with a bristling moustache, just been done for tax evasion in Germany, but the European Parliament has decided that's okay. That's okay, he can claim immunity. And Elmar Brok has been for 20 years a member or chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Parliament. He's a very influential Euro-federalist. A man who, of course, coming from Germany, could never ever talk about his own country because of their guilt about the past. But Elmar Brok is ramrod straight, you know, to that European anthem. Anyway, I'd been there a few weeks, got in the car with Elmar Brok, and off we went, and there was an absolutely stony silence. And Brok sort of kept looking round at me and objecting to the fact that I'd even been born, I think. You know. And Elmar Brok said, "You're ruining everything, you're ruining it!" I said, "No, Mr. Brok. You know, I have been put here by a segment of the electorate that think you guys are wrong, that think we should put all of this to free and fair referendums, and if you win, that's fine, and if I win, that's fine. But that's the way to settle this." He said, "You don't understand. None of us, Britain, France, Germany, none of us are big enough on our own to be the world's global superpower. We have to be bigger than America. We have to be the #1. And it was wrong of me to say to a German, "I bet your grandfather said things like that." I couldn't help it. I just couldn't help it. But I mean, there we are. There is an insight. There is an insight from somebody who's lived and breathed and worked within these institutions. I'm not making this up. This is what these people believe. This is what these people want. They are bloody dangerous people, in my opinion. Right, okay, so.
So I have a little question. Imagine one day, to make it easy, a new country in Europe, for example, Flanders in a couple of years.
Yes.
I hope so.
As long as 2 years, you think, yeah.
One of the first things, if not the very first, is to organize a referendum about staying a member of Europe as it works now, or if it does not work now. And if they say, we don't want to continue like now, we get out of it. What would be the result of it? Or what would be...
Well, I mean, there are some within the institutions who, of course, will always make dire and grave warnings that if you act against the union in any way at all, you know, they will stop trading with you, you'll become a pariah state. Actually, none of that's going to happen, is it? Because business is business. You know, I mean, if you're a Flemish manufacturer of widgets, and I'm a consumer, and your widgets are good widgets, at a good price for widgets, sir, I will go on buying your widgets, regardless whether you're from Belgium or from an independent, free, new, proud state in Flanders. You know, I will go on buying your widgets. And similarly, you know, whenever I've asked this question about Britain's future, you know, I've been told by everybody, actually, in reality, from Neil Kinnock, God, I couldn't stand him, never mind, to Tony Blair and all the rest of it, you know, if Britain wants to do something different, that's up to Britain. But the best answer of all to this was the great, lordly, godlike Giscard d'Estaing, who, when he launched the Constitution, said, and with this Constitution, back to the previous question, you know, with this Constitution, we will become a global superpower. And a German correspondent said, but, sir, a foreign policy, a European army, a European navy, the British will never accept this. And Giscard said, what the British need to understand is that unless they accept this Constitution, straight treaty, they will be relegated to the status of a country like Switzerland. And you know what? I thought, if you want to relegate me to the status of a country that is the richest in Europe, that has exactly the same terms of trade with France and Germany as we do whilst being members, that doesn't have to put up with 3,000 new laws a year, that doesn't have to pay 50 million quid a day as a membership fee to a club whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for the last 16 years in a row, and if you mean be relegated to the status of a country whose democracy is so open and free that they can hold their own parliament to account by demanding a referendum, I'm all for relegation to the status of a country like Switzerland, and it'll be the same for you. Good, thank you. I'm done now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faculty. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, of course. But I have to add something. You said before that it would be more than likely that you not receive only doctorate from our university, but I have a little surprise for you. Oh, Lord. Gosh. We just made one, and we would like to give you sort of part of it, and maybe you'll put it somewhere in the old archives, and maybe some years maybe you'll remember that you didn't even Ghent. My story is trying to get it now to some place. Nina, I'll also tell that after the lecture you have a little pint in the Kapitelhuis. I think you all know the location. If you don't, you just follow me. And there we go.
Right. Well, there we are.